everyone. Thanks for joining Jeff and I today on our webcast. Today, we're going to talk about the crude facts about Venezuela. Over the weekend, the U.S. struck Venezuela and claims to have taken control of key oil assets. However, the markets were fairly calm with this, so kind of gives us an indicator that there's not a near-term supply shock. So why don't we go through some of the specifics of why we think that this is not an imminent threat to Canada?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons. I think the main one is that the infrastructure in Venezuela has decayed over the last several decades since the industry was nationalized by Hugo Chavez, and it all needs to be replaced if they want to get oil out of the ground. It's one thing to say you have 300 billion barrels in reserves, which is about 17% of global reserves. It's one thing to say that, but it's much different to say how much of it goes into production. So somebody's got to spend the money to bring the infrastructure up to par, and it's
Mhm.
going to be billions of dollars. I saw one statistic that said 12 to 15 billion will be required just to get 500,000 barrels back into production per day. And if they
Right.
want to get back up to the levels they achieved before Hugo Chavez, you're talking about $100 billion. So it's a ton of money. Trump's saying that the oil companies will pay for it. But if you look at the last few years, oil found religion in cutting back on their spending and returning excess cash to shareholders. So you're asking them to pony up 100 billion to increase production.
Yeah.
And if you look at the three big ones, Chevron, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips. Collectively, their capital expenses last year were about $56 billion.
Yeah. And didn't two out of the three of the companies pull out of Venezuela back in 2007?
Hmm. Yeah, because of political uncertainty. And if you're a company that's serving shareholders, what my first question would be, how do we know it's not going to get nationalized again in 10 years? There's
Hmm.
no direction at this time as to what kind of regime will be taking over. So they'd have to get some kind of guarantee from the government.
Right.
And
And yeah, they have to get
so,
authority from Congress.
yeah, to spend new money. That's another good point. If so, let's say the Trump administration says, fine, the oil companies don't want to spend 100 billion, the U.S. government will spend 100 billion. Well, that's a spending bill that has to go through Congress. And
Right.
right now, if you look at the prediction markets, it's pricing in with 80% odds that the House flips Democrat this fall. So if that
Hmm.
happens, you're not going to get a spending bill.
Right. So it's not looking, and even if they do, they compare it to like Keystone Pipeline project, which took decades to get pushed through, right?
And then it didn't happen.
And it didn't happen. So,
So yeah,
yeah.
that's a great precedent. And that was just dealing with Washington. That wasn't dealing with um, a country in Latin America that's subject to dictatorships. So I think between the cost of this plus the political uncertainty, I don't think this is a short-term threat to Canadian oil. Oh, and we should say, where
Hmm.
does Canada fit in here? So Canada
Hmm.
produces heavy crude, which is very similar to what Venezuela has in the ground, heavy crude. So that has to go to refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast. And so the fear is that this is a perfect substitute for what Canada produces, and therefore maybe they'll just use Venezuela crude instead of Alberta crude. But
Oh,
because of
the
these, re
competition.
well, yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same product, so it has to be refined to be turned into diesel. So I think this is something to monitor long term, but I don't see any short or medium term threats to the crude in Alberta.
Yeah. Okay. So Canadian heavy and crude remains reliable. essential to U.S. refining systems. And yeah,
Yeah, and if you look at Iraq and Libya, um, 15 years after Libya, their oil production is a quarter less than it was before the US intervened. And in Iraq, it took about a decade for it just to get back to the levels it was at when Saddam Hussein was in power. So I mean, anyone expecting additional supply to come onto the market in the next few months should, in my view, should look at some of these constraints. Political uncertainty, very expensive cost, and very poor historical precedent.
hmm yeah.
So we're not making any
Mhm.
changes to our Canadian energy holdings. We were actually buying more of it for clients with cash yesterday and on Monday too.
Yeah. Okay.
All
Thanks very
right.
much, Jeff. Talk to you
Yeah.
later.
Thanks.